Karen Reynolds. Mother, daughter, wife, free spirit, poet, dreamer, romantic, lost, selfish, loner, outcast, antagonist, and the plethora of other words used to describe her. Karen, since her very first implied mention in episode 1, has been much of an enigma. Opinions differ so wildly on the estranged mother wolf that speaking to two separate people on the matter would give you a completely different outlook on her character. She is in equal parts admirable and detestable, somehow weak and strong in spirit at the same time. Karen is a character that implores us to think of the game beyond the stage upon which it is set. Why is she the way she is? Will she ever become anything of a motherly figure to her lost sons? Can her actions ever truly be justified? Where do the game's events leave her mental state? And just who is Karen Reynolds? Karen was born to Fire Chief Stephen Reynolds and dedicated wife Claire. A happy, healthy young girl, Karen performed well throughout school and took an interest in art, photography, and particularly writing. Karen's childhood was one of excessive love from her parents, living in their large family home in Beaver Creek, and surrounded materially with everything a young girl could want. However, as Karen grew up, she began to crave more from her life. Amidst her parents' control over her life and the small, dead town of Beaver Creek, she felt a spark, a strong desire to make it big in the world. Karen had dreams of escaping to New York City where she would publish her poetry and live the life she wanted to live. Almost everything in her teenage room indicated her want to flee the nest, from carvings on her drawers to a bus ticket from Oregon to New York stashed inside her old music player. Karen was clearly unhappy where she was, detailing this extensively throughout her writing. But then, things changed when she met Esteban. Presumably young love, Karen and Esteban met around the time that Esteban made his way over to the United States, preparing to build his garage business. I like to imagine that he was passing north towards Seattle when he met her on a stop, who fell in love with him and offered to come with him on his journey and left her parents behind to start a new life. Though there was some animosity towards Esteban at the time, Karen was still in close contact with her parents, who she visited back and forth due to the relatively small distance between them. There are implications in-game that Karen was wedded to Esteban and had Sean, her very first child, extremely young, as early as 19 or 20. Though Karen wasn't particularly enthused about the life of a parent, she saw it as a necessity to bear grandchildren for her mother and father, as well as children for her husband. And so, young Sean Diaz was born, presumably within the first part of the marriage between Esteban and Karen. While Karen would not have another child for 8 long years, she cherished the time she spent with her firstborn son, forming a very close bond with him, evidenced in-game by her surprising knowledge of Sean as a person, his favourite foods, his personality quirks, etc. These 8 years, it seemed to Sean, were the happiest of his life. A loving mother and father, the latter of whom ran a successful business, living in comfort and security, a happy, healthy child. However, during this time, all was not perfect behind closed doors. While Sean didn't seem very clued into what was going on, Karen and Esteban shared the burden of a failing marriage due to Karen's desire to leave. She had regretted her choice of becoming a mother to appease the ideal of what she was expected to be, the dogmatic nuclear family dynamic which had plagued her life from the cradle to the grave of her first marriage. Grow up, have kids, raise them, grow old, die. Karen felt her youth fleeting, the core desires slowly draining from her life, feeling a stale-faced young woman, the urge to leave condensed into an immediate and overwhelming stress, and so she did. After the birth of her second child, young Daniel, she left 8-year-old Sean and grieving Esteban with a busy garage, a young baby, and a son who felt abandoned, completely cut ties and was disowned by her parents. Karen proceeded to do what she said she always would, travel across the country. She made her way to New York City, where she was met with bitter disillusionment. Staying at an apartment she rented out from an old pen pal Emma led her to struggle tremendously with debt due to the pressure of living in such a high-cost, high-pressure environment. Karen felt as if New York had been a tremendous mistake. Due to a late submission of a poem Karen had submitted, she was plunged into the debt of $10,000 around 2 years after she had left in 2010. Upon receiving this insurmountable task to repay all of the money, Karen contacted her parents in a haphazard act of desperation, begging them to help her. Claire and Stephen offered to pay off her debts for her on the condition that Karen would return home and fulfill the role she had tried so hard to avoid. Karen starkly refused, instead heading to the total opposite end of the country, down to Florida, where she met a young woman, Maggie Hill. Karen and Maggie became friends during what was an incredibly dark time for both of them. Around this time, Karen looks dazed, her face plunged of energy and spirit, broken by the world, not quite sure where she belonged. All seemed lost. The golden jail cell of society beckoned her forth once again to the safety and security of raising a family with Esteban. But she had made her choices, which could not be undone. She felt it impossible to bite her tongue in return. And so she didn't. Maggie was a saviour of sorts for Karen. Sometime after they met, Maggie invited Karen back to a small desert community in the middle of Arizona called Away, a tiny town, off the grid, completely detached from the rest of society. Amongst the tumbleweeds and scorpions, Karen moved into a trailer and she found something there. Beyond material possessions, fame or fortune, she found a place peaceful enough for her to simply exist without pressure, without expectation, to casually live amongst friends. And after the stress of New York, it had been something she'd needed. Some would say that Karen was finding a place therapeutic for her. Others could argue she was seeking to avoid responsibility. Either way, she spent the next years of her life in the desert, writing articles for Desert Weekly, working some jobs at nearby towns such as water parks and such. It was the happiest and freest she'd ever been. Over the years, Karen made peace with herself. She found it in herself to let go of the past and try not to stress about it. The guilt of leaving her sons was not easy to shake. Right until the events of 2016, though she made no effort to contact them, it was always a thought in her mind. Karen never lost the love for her sons, especially not Sean. She thought about him a lot, writing poems, wishing that things had been different, that she could have worked things out. It's clear, by the events of the game, that Karen has pondered a lot on these thoughts. She's been through her own mind a million times, staring out into that desertscape. Introspective as ever, she wrote all her thoughts down using every simile and metaphor her mind could muster. She's left with no guilt for what she did, but a saddening feeling in her heart, that things could have been different. In October of 2016, disaster struck, when Karen learned that her husband had been killed, and both of her sons were missing, and the suspects of a murder of a police officer. She spent some time in disbelief before sending a letter to her parents, on the assumption that Sean may go there seeking help at their doorstep. The letter reads, "Mom, Dad, I've heard the news about Seattle. I'm heartbroken. I have no idea what's going on, but I do know Sean and Daniel are innocent. You're the only family they have left, so please help my boys if they come to you. You can reach me at this address. It's a PO box I use sometimes. I know you don't owe me anything, but I beg you, please, help my sons if you can. K." As this letter was hidden from Sean and Daniel, it led to some animosity between them, and Karen didn't receive any confirmation from her parents that Sean and Daniel had been at their house. It would be around another 3 months before Karen would hear anything related to her sons, when she received a letter at her PO box from Jacob Hackerman, telling Karen that Daniel was in Nevada and that Sean was missing. Karen would pack her bags from her desert hideaway and venture out to Haven Point, hearing word of Daniel's miracles through posters and website advertisements. It was at this moment that she met her son, Sean Diaz, staring at her outside of a church gate with an eye missing and beaten badly. The events of episode 4 follow, to lead us right up to Sean and Daniel's departure from Away. Karen has given them a home amidst their trauma, time to rest and heal. There is a sense of connection established between her and Sean. The two are no longer estranged. Sean can even refer to her as his mother, rather than Karen, if the two have a high enough relationship. After sending her sons out to the border with a plan, money, food, and a police scanner, Karen is arrested and taken into police custody before being interrogated by Agent Flores, after which she takes the blame for burning down the church at Haven Point. Not much is known about what happens to Karen after the events of the game. It's safe to assume that if Sean's name is not cleared via him reaching Mexico or dying at the border, Karen could serve a short prison sentence for arson, or may be acquitted of charges given the pressure with her sons. The former of these two is evidenced by the fact that Daniel cannot stay with her if he is left in the US for another couple of years in parting ways. By the events of redemption, Karen is shown to still care about her boys and has rekindled a connection with her mother in parting ways 14 years after she left her family. Karen Reynolds lived a troubled, abnormal life, not one many would expect from a middle-class white woman growing up in a small town. But then life does find its own way of being strange. From her own perspective, Karen's situation can actually be understood rather well from the player base which she was designed for, young adults. She felt her youth fleeting, that primal desire to be free and roam was embedded into her head. She made commitments that she simply could not maintain. However, in order to consider her story from all angles, you have to take a look at the people she hurt. Like Daniel, for example, Karen's reasoning for leaving the Diaz family when she did was the effect it may have on her youngest son. Through doing this, she hurt him even worse. It is noted throughout Life is Strange 2 at some points that Daniel seems to have a deep issue with the immense burden of guilt, the fear of judgment from those he loved, the fear of rejection and abandonment. This is noted in episode 2 twice, both in Daniel expressing guilt over being the cause of his father's death, and if caught lying to Chris of his own decision, despite Sean imploring him to tell the truth. Again in episode 3, where he notes that he feels as if he has let everybody in his life down and feels personal guilt at his anger issues, and in episodes 4 and 5 when he expresses a great deal of guilt over Sean's eye. Combining this with Sean's mention that Daniel feels like he was the reason for Karen leaving, it becomes all too clear that Daniel's abandonment issues can be traced as far back to when his mother left when he was a baby. Despite what she may have thought she was doing, she utterly abandoned her son, not even sending him as much as a birthday card or a letter of acknowledgement. Daniel grew up feeling as if he was the reason for his mother leaving, and he likely felt guilty on behalf of Sean and Esteban too, that he had stripped them of a wife and a mother in equal respect. She had existed in the family long before he had. Even Lisbeth comments that Daniel feels extreme guilt, and this is why she finds it so easy to prey on him, to force him into prayer to repent for the sins he has committed. She also comments that he craves a maternal figure, which is reflected in how fast he is to accept Lisbeth as the Reverend Mother. Not to mention Esteban, heartbroken, lost at a time when his garage was getting busy. He had a baby and an 8-year-old to take care of, and his life was likely more difficult and under pressure than it ever had been up to this point. He mourned the loss of his wife, hiding all of her belongings and refusing to discuss it with his sons, the two people he is often the most open and honest with about conflict resolution. He deemed that it was too great of a stress for them to bear, or perhaps he himself, as strong in spirit as he was, could not find it in himself to bring it up with Sean. Speaking of Sean, potentially the worst off of them all, bereaved, deprived of a mother who he felt so close to, Karen ignites Sean's inferiority complex. Thrust into a world without his mother, he felt as if he was never good enough for her, that she left because she wasn't satisfied with him or with the family. He interpreted her desire for something different as a desire for something better, and who can truly say whether Karen's heart was gravitated towards either one of those? Her first point was to visit New York to pursue her dreams of becoming an author. Could it be argued that Karen was not seeking something different in her life, but something better? That she thought that she could do better than a husband and 2 kids? Or was this a genuine part of her life that she felt she could not subvert, an inescapable, inevitable path to escaping her life, or simply to find something superior? It's no secret that Karen is an idealist. Her dreams have never been compromised or bent to boundaries set by anyone but herself. The woman is clearly something of a dreamer, somebody to be considered in her own regard, separate to Sean, to Daniel, and indeed to her entire life. Karen, at the core of her personality, has one common motive: to live in a way that she is satisfied with. Disillusioned and in permanent discord with herself, this innate desire plaguing her every existence within the confines of her home, Karen took the out, but at a late opportunity. But what did she want all along? Well, she wanted something different. For Karen, the grass seems to have always been greener on the other side. Growing up, she became excited to flee the nest Claire and Stephen had set up for her. She took to Seattle, the big city, where she hoped to find happiness with the man she loved. She was dissatisfied and thought of her fleeting dreams, which led her to abandon her family to pursue her dreams of becoming a writer in New York. She failed and became overstimulated and overwhelmed by the unpredictability and financial burden of living in such a place. She sought peace in Florida, somewhere sunnier, warmer, somewhere she thought she would meet like-minded people. She looked for a place she could drown her sorrows, given how beaten down she looked in 2010. She met Maggie, who brought her to Away, as Karen had lost all satisfaction with life. And even in Away, Karen is still left trying to escape in the little ways she can. She hates going into the local town for supplies and says that she likes to visit the Grand Canyon to get away from the place she regards as a safe haven from society. She is an escapist, the urge is insatiable, and with each passing day she longs for something new, something different. The grass, to Karen, will always be greener on the other side, because at heart, she's an explorer with a suppressed youth. All of her motivations stem from her desire to escape, until one fateful day when she receives a letter from Jacob Hackerman. Karen helping Sean and Daniel is the first time that without the incentive of escape or a different life, she voluntarily breaks the promise to herself, a promise that she made as soon as she left the Diaz family, that she would seek her own freedom and live her life the way she saw fit. She goes against her personal motives that have fueled the past 20 years or so of her life, and it is not done lightly. To go against herself like that, it would be to question everything she is and has been for her entire life. She spent so long evading consequences, yet she voluntarily confronts the monster of her past that threatens to destroy the lives of 2 children that she abandoned nearly a decade ago. Her concern for her sons overrides her basic principles of life as she drives across the desert trying to help Daniel. Her automatic instinct, despite minimalistic living, is to check into a motel, buy supplies for Sean, and help him get his brother out of a cult. Karen's desire to flee comes from the feeling of being controlled and imprisoned by society and her parents, which is why her action 2 months later of voluntarily giving her name up to be arrested as a facade for his sons to escape the country is wildly impressive. This is no golden jail cell, this is the real thing. She fought so hard for her freedom and yet would give it all up for her sons. Every mistake, every late night spent pondering about her decisions, her love for her friends in a way, she would voluntarily discard it all for Sean and Daniel because she believes she owes it to them. She doesn't want to atone for what she did, and nor does she want to claim the responsibility and title of a good parent. She just genuinely wants to help them and is willing to sacrifice and destroy the entire principle on which her life is built just to accomplish that. It's no small sacrifice, this is Karen's entire life. And so, should Karen be forgiven? After everything is said and done, she's sitting in a jail cell just to help her children across the border. She's dignified and strong in the face of danger, but that does not change what she did to the Diaz family, and indeed to her own family. It cannot bandage the wounds of the past. While Daniel still has a chance to grow up with his mother, by the time Sean is in Mexico dead or in jail, he and Karen are left in an odd place. I genuinely believe that Karen would visit Sean in Mexico and indeed in prison, given that she's had his release 15 years later. The two have likely forged a bond, more friendly than maternal, but they seem genuinely happy to see each other. And is it not fitting then to declare that Sean canonically forgives Karen for the past? That she has truly moved on from that point? If she never wanted to see her sons again, she wouldn't. She would simply vanish back into the shadows as if she had never been there. Instead, she makes an effort as a matured woman to rekindle her connection with her family. Look at what she says to Daniel, "If you ever need me, I'm right around the corner." This implies that she's willing to help her sons into the future too. She wants to strike a balance between her escapism and her desire to love and be loved. And I think that's what's really beautiful about the parting ways and redemption endings, the repaired relationship with her parents that has blossomed. Ultimately, the question is not whether Sean forgives Karen, or whether her parents do, or whether Daniel does, or whether Esteban does. It's whether you do. Your entire impression of the character can be answered with one simple question. Do you forgive Karen for abandoning her family and pursuing her dreams? If the answer is no, then you likely view Karen's actions as inherently selfish and too damaging, and cannot find it within yourself to forgive her for prioritizing her own mental health and life. You're condemning her to an existence she is unhappy with. If the answer is yes, then you're justifying almost a decade of pain that Karen caused her entire family, and are allowing her to circumvent the role she took on. In equal measure, if you say no, you're likely concerned with the moral implications of her leaving her family, as it's a decision based entirely around herself that ultimately hurts others more than her, and you view her as a bad person because of this. If you say yes, then you could believe that she has genuinely turned over a new leaf, and that she is a better person than when she had left, as this is the only situation that can truly accommodate a Karen that is happy with her role as a mother. It's also okay to be a fence sitter, to not take a particular side in this debate, to understand the courage and strength her sacrifice took and applauding her for it, while condemning the actions of her past, and reinforcing that she can never atone for tearing the Diaz family apart and sending her parents into a state of grief for 8 years. The question will always loop back to the same thing, however. Do you forgive Karen Reynolds? And so, that's what I want you to answer in the comments below. I know that the answer isn't as simple as a yes or a no. Karen is a very complex character that warrants a complex analysis in order to determine whether you like her or not. To simply grace her with a yes or a no would be an insult to her writing. As a character, undoubtedly she should be appreciated for the depth she offers, yet as a person, opinions of her are polarising to say the least. What do you think? Was Karen selfish for leaving her children, or can you understand her struggle? Do you think giving up everything she worked so hard for was a brave move, or do you think her sacrifice was too little too late? It's always interesting to read about this character, so I'd love to go through and hear your thoughts on her. But with that being said, this has been the full story of Karen Reynolds, from a suppressed teenager, to a broken housewife, to a free spirit, Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more content just like this. Huge thank you to my patrons Hugo, Clegg and AJ for supporting my channel. As always, remember to ask for the manager and have a good day. Peace and love.